I've been wanting to make this video for so long. And thanks to the addition of the most recent batch of Summoners War original monsters replacing the ones from the last collab, we now have everything we need to rank the Nat 5 collab families. Quick disclaimer, I will be including 4.5 star families, meaning if a family has 5 stars and 4 stars mixed into them, I am going to be including them on the list, but I'm only taking the relevant star rating monsters into consideration. Lastly, this list is based off of impact, and we're taking the average of the whole family into consideration. So even if it has one standout, the whole family might appear lower than maybe that one monster deserves. You'll see what I'm talking about. Let's just get into it. Starting us off, which is not where you want to be on a list of rankings. It's Frederick, the light dual blade. Actually, the only dual blade. Frederick doesn't see a lot of play. He's not necessarily bad, in fact he's good in tandem with other tanky units. In fact, I've seen a lot of people use him with the Fire Macaron Guard as well as things like Chandra to make a comp that's all about trying to control who your opponent attacks. But he didn't generate too much excitement, and that's still carrying over to this day. So he's last. Next, it's a family who just has spectacular skill animations, the Desert Warriors. The fire one, Asher, is really good. His third skill does so much stuff for like no reason. I'm pretty sure it was an experiment and just seeing how many words they could fit into a skill and how good it would be. Turns out it's really good. He cleanses himself and another ally for some reason, then he hits like 5 times, does a defense break. The guy is a machine on additional damage. But the litness of Asher is not quite enough to carry them deeper into the list, especially with units like Salah that are committed to like keeping them at this level. Salah just needs like one thing. I don't know what it is, but he just needs one thing and then he's gonna be really good. Next, Sylvia, the Dark Neostone Agent. You thought I'd forget that the Neostone Agents are a collab? Not a chance. I love Sylvia. She has a lot of use in guild content. You can also bring her into RTA for a lot of fun comps. I love team up effects, and Sylvia brings an ally every single time she attacks. And there are a lot of good first skills in the game, so this monster's awesome. In fact, I did want to put her further down the list, but she is the only 5-star of this entire family, so like, you know, there's only so much weight that she can pull on her own. Now might be a good time to reiterate, not calling her bad. She's dope. Dude, you bring her with things like Verd, or even one of the Beast Monks now, like Chandra, because they auto-crit on skill 1, and you just have a pretty fearsome comp, because you're just accruing so much value off of this monster. Next up, it's Thomas, the Wind Lollipop Warrior. Again, the only Lollipop Warrior. This monster is probably quite a lot better than you remember him being. Thomas is literally the fastest monster in-game once he's actually in a game. So like, you know, discounting Spectra's 126 base speed, ignoring Leo's passive, he would be the fastest monster. The name of the game with Thomas is Disruption. He has a skill 2 that's going to try to strip somebody, and he can also increase their cooldown time. So ideally, you outspeed and then increase someone's cooldown time by 2 turns. He also has stun on skill 1, so he can help keep things locked down. But the thing to note about that skill 2 is that there is no activation rate. It just happens. Now, it can still be resisted, but at least you don't have to bank on like a 50-50 or something. So where Thomas is really good is recognizing that your enemy is trying to go for a turn 1 play, and instead you go in and you reset the cooldown of that Ashir, or maybe you put the Maximilian on cooldown, so that way you dodge a cleave. Bernadotte the Fire Shadowclaw is next, and he has made a pretty significant impact, especially in PvE content. A lot of folks, myself included, like to use his leader skill that gives additional crit rate in Steel Fortress. I've even seen people use him in the spiritual realm, though admittedly Verd kind of dominates that. Bernadotte really wants to crit. He's able to strip and apply branding on skill 3, and if he crits on every single hit, then he gets an additional turn, and that'll let him combo into skill 2. All of that compounds and makes him a really good setup unit. So right after your defense break unit goes, he's there to capitalize on that and put branding on for the future units to move. And of course, you can also bring him into Guild Wars or RTA if you're so inclined, but he's kind of a standout in PvE. Next is the Magic Order Elementalists. Probably my favorite member of this family is Groa, the Light Magic Order Elementalist. Her passive is really fun because it essentially turns dots into AoE damage, so she pairs really well with Sath. And now this just clears waves in TOA in a very satisfying way. Then the Fire and Dark ones, Elshaya and Celestara, both pair really well with things like Shizuka and Tomoe. Or if you're running a Layla comp, could also work there. So yeah, essentially if you're running a comp already that's looking for monsters that can apply or interact with a lot of debuffs, then these monsters might be for you. And so will the next family on our list, the Magic Order Enchantresses. The fire and water members of this family would be really good in those situations as well, especially because Johanna, the water one, also applies Cleanse Block and can apply Oblivion on skill 2. So if you're queuing up an RTA with a debuff heavy comp and you happen to queue into somebody who's running Juno, Veramos, and other problematic auto cleanse units, you might be able to get away with tricking them because you've got so much up your sleeve with Johanna. Essentially, you can ban one and then Oblivion the other one or apply Cleanse Block so that you can kind of minimize the damage dealt. So basically, it gives those debuff comps a fighting chance up against those hard counters. And then Hilda actually made an appearance in the most recent Fake Passives video because her third skill has a clause on it that allows it to get some cooldowns back as long as she's not attacked on her turn. Out of a lot of the families that we've covered so far, I would say that the Magic Order Elementalists and the Enchantresses have a pretty good chance of moving up higher in the impact level, but because they haven't been in the game for that long, all things considered, there's still room to grow. But for now, right in the middle of the bell curve is probably a good place to put them. Next, we got the Steel Commanders. The highlights for these are the Water, the Fire, and the Dark one, but the Dark one's a 4-star, so I can't really count him on the list, but his name's Evan, and that's pretty sick. Lionel is the water one, and he's got a really solid base speed at 113. He's a turn 1 facilitator, so he'll do an attack bar boost to the person with the highest attack bar, and then he'll apply an attack power buff to the thing with the second highest attack bar. So if you're really confident in your speed tuning, this is the right guy for you. This is my man right here. Let me introduce you to Lionel. Lionel's gonna hook you up. So it turns out that being able to strip AoE with that effect is really good, especially for like Maximilian cleave teams. And Patrick, the fire one, just has a passive that allows him to conditionally ignore some defense. And oftentimes that's enough to just get you like halfway through the list. So congrats to Patrick. Also, Ian, the light one, we've seen used in a few tournaments, and he's so sick when you can bring him back with something like Shizuka and surprise someone with ignore defense damage. And his skill 2 that applies threat state on someone is also really synergistic with Shizuka because you can draw heat away from her, so that way hopefully it can get back to her turn sooner, and then Ian is free to snipe some more people. The Magic Order Guardians are up next. And this is a whole family of 5-star units. The standouts from among them are probably the Fire, Water, and Light ones. The Fire one is really good in situations where you bring a Rika or a Belinus. It even has some use in TOA. You can essentially apply a lot of dots and also stun your opponents. So it makes for great follow-up after your strippers move. We're all familiar with the Water one at this point. The Water one is actually predominantly for PvE environments. It's got max HP damage scaling, and its third skill refreshes its own cooldown time if it attacks somebody who's immune to stun. And bosses are immune to stun. But people really like the Water one for the leader skill because it increases the attack of water attribute allies. And if you've been keeping up with a lot of the speed teams that are going around right now featuring things like Liam and Kyle, those are water units. So that's an incredibly valuable leader skill. And Lars, the light one, can ignore his own cooldown time if he generates enough stacks on his passive. And that has just gotten some super cool replays. Like, this unit is so fun to watch. The Magic Order Sword Singers are what's going to round out the 4 here. And all 3 of the Nat 5s have the same combination of skill 1 and skill 2. So you know it's a good skill 2. And it is, because it ignores defense. Now, the one that I really want to focus on here is the light one, because she's super dope. The speed scaling damage and the ignore defense effects are really what people are after here. And the water one is really interesting because it auto crits so long as you're faster than your target, and you won't get critically hit as long as you're faster than the person attacking you. So there's an element of offense and defense in that passive, which is probably what people are really drawn to. Next, it's the Gladiatrices. This is a family with only 3 Nat 5s in it, but those 3 Nat 5s have put in so much work that they've had such an impact, they deserve to be this high on the list. And even though the dark one is excellent too, I'm mostly talking about Federica. Federica is responsible for bringing snipe to non-snipe comps. Sometimes you can just slam down a Federica in an RTA draft and she either gets banned or your opponent loses. And a lot of that is thanks to her ignore defense on skill 2, plus a passive that will protect her from death. When she would die, she instead gets an invincibility buff and a life drain buff, which is the same vampiric buff that's given by Ergar. The dark one is similar, but it doesn't have a passive. Same skill 2, but it'll apply endure on all allies, in addition to an attack buff. We only have a few families left. Next up, it's the Pudding Princesses. And this is how you know the top of the list is really packed. Every single one of these units gets used. Lucia is a counter pick for if your opponent is bringing a ton of attack bar manipulation, and it also increases your healing. Adriana is set up with attack buff, immunity, speed buff, and Oblivion on skill too. Angela is really fun because she just puts up a ton of shields and punishes people for attacking into them. Ariana, the light one, has a pretty flexible third skill that can revive someone or just give them immunity and endure, and also refreshes their cooldown time. And then Elena is a non-hitting strip unit that's kind of a replacement for Tiana. Kind of. Not really. Nobody's ever gonna do what Tiana does, but it's a pretty good interpretation. Next up are the Macaron Guards. And the Macaron Guards have had quite an impact on the meta in RTA. I'm looking at you, Manon. But most of them are used. Alice has actually already come up in this very same video. I mentioned her earlier when we were talking about Frederick. Alice is one of the only ways that exists in Summoner's War to get a monster to hit for exactly 1 damage, which is basically the Summoner's War version of 0. Then we have Manon, the Water Macaron Guard, who has a chance to parry and counterattack. Manon was tearing it up in RTA until she got a nerf that basically put her passive in the same zone of parity as similar units. So now it'll only proc when an ally other than herself is attacked, which makes sense because of the genre of passive that she's got. What makes her so difficult is that she protects herself. Kind of like her sister Giselle, who applies AoE defense break on her enemies and gives invincibility to her allies. Pairs really well with Shizuka and can also be a damage dealer and a support. And Audrey has also made appearances in tournaments recently. She saw play in the Americas Summit. The Mercenary Queens are next. This is another family that is carried by a few very powerful Nat 5s, specifically Berghilda. Berghilda is still one of the best LD Nat 5s in the game right now, and frankly, she's at the top of my most desired list. She gives herself attack bar every single turn. She's immune to crowd control effects. In fact, you should just go read her passive ability. Actually, it's right here. Look at this. There is so much on this passive, and it was all good. She also has defense break, she strips, she stuns. What the heck, dude? Sigrid, the Dark One, has a third skill that applies attack buff and prompts 3 allies to attack. That's all we're gonna cover for them today, but the family is pretty good. For these last 2 families, you could probably make an argument either way, but number 2, it's the Strikers. The Strikers are predominantly carried by 2 members of this 5-star family, Moore and Douglas. We all know Douglas. He's a super popular counter pick. If your opponent picks a lot of wind units or a bunch of AoE, you can oftentimes just slam down a Douglas and they're forced to ban it. And if they don't, you're just gonna have a really fun game of RTA where you kind of just get to sit back and watch. And then there's Moore, who has been one of the most popular first picks for ages. He has come in and out, gone through different builds. He's prompted the creation of certain monsters. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Hey Gang exists because of this guy and Gianna, but you know, because of this guy. He can solo people. You can build him on high attack. You can build him on swift, build him on despair, build him on violent. We've seen it all at this point. These 2 units are enough to carry the entire family to this point on the list, but the Dark One and the Light One are also pretty cool too. Oh, the poor Wind One. He is not the reason why they're this high. And lastly, it's the Slayers. I think the Slayers really deserve the number 1 slot, but I totally see how someone could make an argument for the Strikers being here instead. Carnal has had a huge impact. Cigar is a great starter that can increase the cooldown times of everyone and keep people provoke locked. We all remember what Gurkha did, and Gurkha should still be sorry. But maybe he deserves a little bit of a buff. I don't know, maybe he got nerfed a little bit too hard. And there's Craig. Do you remember Craig? It's one of the most normal names in all of Summoners War, up there with like Liam and Carlos. There we go. Those are the Nat 5 collab families ranked. Let me know what your list would be. I know it'd be a really long list, but maybe just tell me your top 5. Yeah, tell me your top 5. Because otherwise those are going to be really long comments. Awesome. See ya.